Welcome back to CNN's breaking news coverage of President Trump's address. We just heard it to senior U.S. military officers at the Marine base at Quantico, Virginia.
Let's go live now to CNN senior reporter Daniel Dale for a fact check. All right, Daniel, what stood out to you?
There were just so many false claims, and I say that after essentially every speech, unfortunately, from President Donald Trump. But I think this is notable because of the audience. He was telling a lot of lies, saying a lot of other inaccurate things, regardless of his intentions, to the U.S.'s top military leaders. So I want you to listen to something he said about former President Joe Biden and Biden's comments about the U.S. military.
I go around bragging about that. I said, we have the strongest military anywhere in the world. I say it. You never heard Biden say that. Never heard him say anything. But you never heard him say, did you ever hear him say, we have the strongest military? He doesn't say that. I say it.
President Biden said that over and over. This took me about 5 seconds to find on Google. One sample quote from 2023. Our U.S. military, and this is not hyperbole, I've said it for the last 2 years, is the strongest military in the history of the world, not just the strongest in the world, in the history of the world. So this is just one of many such quotes from President Biden. And he made another false claim about President Biden and the military, falsely claiming at another point in the speech today that President Biden had suggested early in this term that he could get rid of the Space Force established under President Trump. Listen to that quote.
The Space Force turned out to be a very important thing. I said from the beginning, you know, when Biden came into office, he wanted to terminate it. He said, and this thing called Space Force, so we could get rid of that. And he got hammered by the people in this room for even suggesting it, because it's very important.
For the first time in years, something happened that even longtime observers weren't prepared for. A political figure who once commanded total loyalty walked into a room designed for applause, only to watch the energy shift, the mood break, and the crowd push back in a way nobody expected. It wasn't loud at first. It wasn't dramatic at the start. It began as a subtle tension, the kind you feel before anyone says a word. But by the end of the night, that tension erupted into walkouts, chants, frustration, and a viral moment that ricocheted across the political world. And if you look closely at what led up to it, the warning signs were already there. Quiet, scattered, and easy to ignore until they all collided at once. Just days before that moment, there was another event. One that didn't get as much attention at first, a speech delivered at the Marine base in Quantico that should have been straightforward, routine, and uncontroversial. A room full of senior military leaders, a predictable message, nothing unusual. But that's not how it unfolded. The reactions weren't the problem. It was what came after. A major news network aired the address and immediately brought on a fact-checker who said the speech was filled with inaccuracies. Not one or two, so many, as he put it. And while that kind of statement wasn't new, the context was different. These comments weren't about a rally crowd or partisan audience. They were about statements aimed directly at high-ranking military leadership. That clip traveled fast, bouncing across social media, triggering commentary from all sides. Supporters brushed it off as hostility from the network. Critics said it was expected. But whichever interpretation people chose, the moment still left a mark. It created an atmosphere, a tone, a sense of friction before the next big event even began. And that friction followed him into the conference hall whether anyone realized it or not. Going into the major conservative gathering, expectations were sky high. This wasn't a mixed audience. These weren't undecided voters or casual observers. This was a crowd of highly invested attendees, people who show up every year, spend money, travel long distances, and dedicate days to hearing from political leaders. Historically, this event had been one of the most loyal spaces imaginable. Standing ovations, electric energy, overflowing enthusiasm year after year. And leading into the weekend, many assumed it would be the same story again. But even before the keynote began, people noticed something different. The crowd felt thinner. Attendance looked lighter. Spaces that used to feel packed now had gaps. Some analysts argued it was normal after the pandemic. Others said it reflected fatigue, but the reason mattered less than the reality. A smaller room shifts the energy. Every reaction becomes more noticeable. Every silence becomes louder. The keynote began normally enough, but the tone changed quickly. Instead of leaning into emotional themes the crowd loved in prior years, he pivoted to one of his favorite policy points: tariffs. A topic he believes strongly in, and one he has defended for years. But in this room, the reception was different. The audience wasn't filled solely with pundits or ideologues. It included small business owners, contractors, import-reliant entrepreneurs, and people whose revenue depends directly on the cost of materials. To them, tariffs aren't theoretical tools or negotiation strategies. They feel like cost increases, plain and simple. And according to multiple accounts, that tension started simmering the moment the tariff portion began. At first, it was just visible discomfort. Arms crossed, shifting in chairs, people whispering to each other. Anyone who's been in a room where the audience disagrees with the speaker knows the signs. Then came groans. Quiet at first, scattered, but unmistakable. The kind of sound that tells you the room isn't buying the argument. And instead of moving past the topic, he doubled down. He expanded on the economic points, repeating his belief that tariffs had been a winning strategy. But the more he defended them, the more irritated the audience seemed. People who usually applauded politely weren't clapping. The discomfort grew. Then came the chants. No more taxes. That phrase hit like a shockwave. People inside the room started looking around, unsure whether to join in or stay silent. Some did chant, others shook their heads. But the message was unmistakable. They saw tariffs as taxes, and they weren't willing to pretend otherwise just because they were at a friendly event. What made it even more surprising was who these attendees were. High-engagement conservatives who normally backed him without hesitation. Chants breaking out in this setting carried a different weight than boos from opponents or pundit criticism on television. These were people who had supported him for years, suddenly pushing back on a policy point he has always championed. And his reaction only made things more tense. Instead of acknowledging the frustration or shifting topics, he suggested the critics were fake, implied some were plants, and threw out accusations that they were disloyal. Comments like that don't land well with a dedicated audience. Even people who agree with a leader politically don't appreciate being dismissed, especially not at their own conference. And that moment, according to many who were there, was when everything started to unravel. Not long after, videos began surfacing online showing people standing up and leaving. One row at first, then another. People walking out in noticeable numbers. Some said it was dozens, others claimed hundreds, and a few insisted it was far more. But the exact number almost didn't matter. The visuals told the story. Seeing people walk out of a keynote at this event was something new, something no one had seen in years. Clips spread across X, Instagram, and TikTok, each one gaining traction quickly. Analysts slowed down the footage, zoomed in on specific sections, debated whether the exits were significant or symbolic. But regardless of interpretation, the imagery was enough to set off a nationwide political firestorm. Even more striking was that the criticism didn't just come from opponents. A well-known figure inside the movement posted that he had lost the room. That comment hit harder than anything coming from critics because it came from within the circle that usually defended him fiercely. When internal voices start expressing frustration, it becomes harder for supporters to brush it off as bias. It becomes a sign of genuine shift, a feeling that something is changing. Around this same time, an older issue began resurfacing online, one many people had forgotten about. During his term, he floated a proposal suggesting Americans would receive $2,000 checks paid for by tariff revenue. Economists at the time questioned where the money would come from, noting there was no clear legal method to convert tariff income into direct individual payments. The checks never appeared, and the idea eventually faded into the background. But during this keynote, when he leaned heavily on tariffs again, that old promise came rushing back into people's minds. Comment sections filled with references to it. Memes popped up. Viewers brought it up in reaction threads. And for many in the audience who already felt financially squeezed, the resurfacing of that unfinished promise hit a nerve. It added another layer of frustration, fueling the emotional tipping point that had already begun forming in the room. This all played out against a broader backdrop of ongoing stress. Court cases, financial disputes, legal battles, political fights, constant headlines that follow him daily. Even supporters who defend him consistently still feel the weight of the non-stop news cycle. And when people carry that much built-up tension, moments like this conference speech can act as a release valve. The reaction wasn't just about tariffs. It wasn't just about one speech. It was about months of pressure, uncertainty, and fatigue converging in one place. Politically, the implications are significant. This wasn't a gathering of moderates or persuadable independents. It wasn't a town hall in a swing district. It was one of the most dedicated conservative spaces in the country. If skepticism emerges there, it signals something deeper. Not the end of a movement, not a collapse, but a subtle shift, one that could matter in upcoming elections. Enthusiasm is crucial in politics. Energy drives turnout. Turnout shapes results, and when the base begins showing signs of strain, strategists on both sides take notice. Donors saw the videos. Operatives analyzed them. Commentators dissected them. The moment quickly became part of a larger narrative, one about momentum, stability, and the emotional connection between a leader and his most loyal supporters. That emotional bond has always been his greatest strength. The sense that he understands his base, speaks for them, and fights on their behalf. When that bond wavers, even slightly, it changes the dynamic. Loyalty becomes conditional. Rallies feel different. Messaging needs recalibrating. Campaigns must adjust. This doesn't mean he disappears from the political landscape. Far from it. But it does mean the coalition around him is evolving. Some supporters are growing more selective. Others want reassurance. Some are frustrated with legal battles overshadowing policy discussion. Others worry about practical issues that affect their wallets. And all of that combines into a more fragile balance than the one that existed a few years ago. Heading into the next election cycle, none of this guarantees outcomes, but it does reshape the landscape. Candidates in competitive districts may adjust their distance. Messaging may soften or harden depending on local sentiment. Fundraising circles might diversify, and opposing strategists will undoubtedly use the footage from that conference as a psychological tool, emphasizing the image of a leader no longer universally embraced by his own base. What happened at that event wasn't just about tariffs or walkouts or a tense exchange. It was about something deeper, a quiet shift becoming visible. A reminder that no political movement stays frozen in time. Even the strongest coalitions evolve, stretch, and sometimes strain. And when once predictable rooms start responding unpredictably, it signals a turning point worth paying attention to. If you found this breakdown helpful and want more deep dive analysis like this, make sure you're subscribed. I appreciate you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.